I want to welcome you all very warmly to this webinar. And just very briefly, I'm Koen van Sey, and I'm the host of the Investing in Regenerative Agriculture and Food podcast, which you can find in all podcast players. And I've had the great pleasure to talk to many people in the space that are trying to scale regenerative agriculture, scale soil health, trying to build businesses, funds, scale farms, etc., build the technology. And so we have a nice bird's eye view. And obviously, we had the pleasure to interview Bastien of Earthworm as well. So, which was our first connection to Earthworm. And actually, we're doing a small series on the corporate sites as well. And we had the pleasure to interview Nestlé, and we're going to do some more, and BNP Paribas. So Earthworm Foundation, very brief intro. There's a lovely website. Don't check it out now because then you're going to go away from this webinar. But they've been around for quite a while. 1999 always sounds like it's last year, but it's actually 23 years ago. Mostly focused on forest at the beginning, but now over the last few years, deeply focused on soil as well. And we're going to hear a lot about a very special project in northern France. So working across 5 continents, I don't think there's a lot of farming on Antarctica. So this basically are all the farming continents, and with over 100 member companies and deeply connected to the social and environmental issues. Again, if you want to go deeper in this, the website is a great place to start. And of course, if you want to listen to a podcast with Bastien, feel free as well. Next slide, please. So why soil health is so key. I mean, I got into this space because of the climate focus. I've always enjoyed good food. So that's definitely a second reason. When I found out there is a strong connection between soil health and nutrient density and health of people, I was very, very happy. But my first reason to come into this space was definitely climate and the potential to store or restore a lot of carbon in the soils that have been lost over the last 12,000, 25,000 or 8,000 years, depending a bit how you count. But basically, since we started farming, we lost a lot of the carbon. And as we learn, there are ways to store that again. And some people call it the biggest carbon bank possible, or the biggest sponge. So if you're interested in climate, you have to be interested in soil. If you're interested in soil health, you have to be interested in the role of large corporates and large companies, because they source from many of the landscapes we would like to see change. They source materials, they source food, obviously, fibers, oils, and most of the things we wear, most of the things we eat come from a landscape somewhere. And many companies, many of them working with Earthworm, have made enormous commitments on responsible sourcing. And now it comes down to how do we change those commitments or transform those commitments into real action. And there, I think the third point is absolutely crucial. How do we partner with farmers instead of deciding for farmers? How do we stand next to farmers, figuring out how to buy full rotations, how to pay much more or pay better or longer, how to compensate for carbon, how to compensate for biodiversity, and how do we make farmers part of the solution instead of always pointing to them as part of the problem? Next slide, please. And so today the setup will be very simple. A short introduction, that was this. And then we go to Anne, we go to Pascal, Beatrice, and Mariana. And so again, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A so we can get to them at the end. And also, if you have a question, please put the name if you want to ask it to a specific person so we don't have to guess. So use the Q&A function for that, and the chat for general chat, as the name suggests. And with that, I would like to go to the next slide and to the first presenter, which is Anne, which is Senior Manager of Living Soils at the Earthworm Foundation. Take it away, Anne.
Thank you, Cohen. Hi, good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. So as Cohen said, I'm the Senior Manager of the Living Soils program in France. It was born in 2018. We are a team of, as of today, 20 people, fast-growing team. We were 4 a year and a half ago, based out of Lille in the north of France. If you can go to the next slide, please. All right, so as of today, we are working with more than 15 retailers, manufacturers, brands in France who want to improve soil health in their supply chain. And so we try to help them do precisely that. So why such an interest in soil? Next slide, please. So if you have a look at some figures that come from the EU soil strategy that was issued in November 2021, you can see that from 60 to 70% of the EU soil is estimated to be unhealthy. 1 billion tons of soil is washed away every year by erosion in Europe, and that represents more than 1 billion euros loss to agricultural production. So it's not something small. And France is no exception. So because maps speak louder than words, if we can go to the next slide. So you can see here, the first map on the left-hand side is the average soil loss by water erosion that was measured from a number of years now. In the circle on the top is where we are mostly working in the north of France, which means that French soil, especially in the north, is already quite vulnerable to erosion. Now, if you look at the right-hand side map, this is a map coming from insurance companies, and it shows that basically claims are going to increase a lot due to climate change events. And there you can see the increase in insurance losses by 2050, that's an estimate, due to runoff flooding. So on the left-hand side, you have soil that are already very vulnerable to erosion. And on the right-hand side, you are the estimated future loss due to runoff flooding. So of course, a soil that is already vulnerable is even more vulnerable to dramatic climate change events. So you can see already the problem. Now, if we stay in that very region at the north of France, 2/3 of the territory of that region are dedicated to agriculture. That represents more than 25,000 farms. And it's a region that is a leader in the country for the production of soft wheat, of vegetables for the industrial processing, sugar beets, potatoes. So in fact, what we are talking about is the resilience of supply chains. It's the sustainability of local food production. So in that context, what is it that we do? Can we go to the next slide, please? We do four main things. First, the central part of what we do is measuring soil health. What makes a healthy soil? How do you measure that? What are the types of indicators that you are going to look at? We have a scientific committee, and Pascal Boivin sits on the committee, is going to speak later. And we have built with our scientific committee an agronomic referential, which we are using to measure soil health and farmers' progression in their transition. Then we also try to align all players involved in the crop rotation behind a common agronomic reference system. This is because the soil supports several crops. So there is a need to go beyond an approach that is based on a single product. There is a need actually for all actors to row in the same direction, if I can say it like this, and the direction should be restoring soil health. So it's also because we wouldn't like farmers to receive different and potentially contradictory injunctions from the different players that are buying from them, hence the need for aligning behind a common agronomic referential. Next slide, please. Then what we do also is to bring in technical support, both to farm advisors and to farmers themselves. It's not easy to change a system. So really technical support is also a key thing of what we are bringing, because we think that's the best insurance against transition hazards. And the last thing also is, because the transition period involves extra costs for farmers and also earnings losses, we are looking at designing, or better say, we support the downstream partners in designing financial incentives to help farmers during the transition period, so that the risk is not solely placed on the farmers' shoulders. That also involves going to the public sectors or going to investors, whether they are philanthropic or impact investors, to complement the kind of funding that needs to be gathered. Now, what is the reality of soil and of farmers in our experience as of today? Next slide, please. So in 2021, last year, we initiated a vast field campaign, and we sampled more than 700 plots, more than 200 farms. And soil health was measured against what we call the living soils indicator. That's an indicator that was designed with our scientific committee. It's an aggregation of sub-indicators that evaluate the biological, the chemical, and the physical quality of soils. And here you can see the results. More than 75% of the plots, they rank from average quality to very degraded quality. It means that 75% of the soils are not in good shape. Now, when you know that only 5% of farmers are engaged today in regenerative agriculture, it means that you have a huge potential of progress that has to be made. So given that situation, what are the first steps that food manufacturers, retailers, and brands can take to support farmers? Next slide, please. The first one is to make the commitment clear, like explain to the world or to the stakeholders why soil is important to them, to their business, what the objective is and what they expect the other players of the supply chain to do. The second thing would be to look inward and to have internal alignment from all internal stakeholders. It means that not only the supply chain department or the CSR departments need to be involved, but the agriculture department, even like those in charge of industrial process, all those that can impact or be impacted by the transition. And then the third one is be ready to go out of the business as usual approach, because soil health won't be achieved by using the usual approach. The usual approach would be to impose another layer of requirements onto the farmer by telling them what to do and not to do. But in fact, farmers already, they have far too many specifications to comply with, and sometimes they are even in contradiction with one another. So instead, companies, they really need to be ready to embark on a journey with their suppliers and with the farmers. And the journey is going to be not so short, because it will take time to restore soil health. And the journey is about two things. First, developing a working relationship with the suppliers, not only a commercial relationship, but a true working relationship. And then together, reflecting carefully about what farmers need to make things happen. As I said, farmers, they do not need new injunctions because it's not easy to change a farming system. So they need technical support, but they also need the risks that go with the transition to be somehow mitigated. So companies and suppliers, they have to reflect around the results they want farmers to achieve, the agronomic levers that can be used, and how they will support farmers technically and financially. So I will now give the floor to Pascal, who sits on our scientific committee, to elaborate a bit more on the approach and on the roadmap that farmers and businesses can follow. Thank you for listening.
Hello, everybody.
Thank you so much. And the word goes to Pascal, who can take us on something impossible, like a deep dive into soil science in a couple of minutes, which is sort of a contradictory in itself. But I'm very much looking forward to see what's possible and in short time frames. I saw the pre-presentation, which was very, very encouraging. So please take it away.
Thank you very much. So just to introduce myself very shortly, I'm professor in science, I'm agronomist, I'm working on farms. So most, of course, I cannot develop the scientific arguments, but most of the things I can tell you come from on-farm and knowledge and on-farm observations. Also, I'm the president of the European Confederation of Soil Science Societies, so I can tell you also that the question of a regenerative food system is on the top of our priorities. Next slide, please. So there is a momentum for soil health now. It has been seen from the beginning of the 21st century that the soils are the cornerstone of ecosystem services, and these ecosystem services are really absolutely indispensable to human life, human being. And this degradation of soil, therefore, is worsening the condition of a lot of people, estimated to 3.2 billion people on Earth. Soil health refers to soil quality, which is defined in science as the ability of the soil to fulfill its functions. So this ecosystem services. And the soil organic carbon, this is the scientific wording, but we often talk of humus, is the key factor, an indicator of soil functions and soil quality on the top soil, on the very top soil. So this is the layer of soil we are working with, and it is absolutely, its quality is absolutely determined by soil organic carbon content. Next slide, please. And now we have also this question of global change and climate change, of course, this climate emergency. So not only the soils are at a breaking point, but the climate emergency urges us to take action on soils. Why? Because it has been clearly acknowledged that the only deployable and potentially effective negative emission technology is CO2 sequestration in soils, and this led to the 4 per mil initiative that most of you know, I think. But also because we know that 50 to 70% of the humus of the soil organic carbon content was lost with intensive agriculture during the second half of 20th century. Next slide, please. So we need to take action, and we have insight from farms, and we know how. There is a huge potential of regenerative agriculture, the techniques of conservation agriculture and agroecology allow to dramatically increase the soil organic carbon content. Here in the cropland of Switzerland, we have identified many farms that are far beyond the 4 per mil. They're 10 times more, 40 per mil of yearly increase of soil organic carbon content based on conservation agriculture techniques. And this is a negative emission technology because it is capturing the CO2 of the atmosphere by plants, and it can be sequestrated in soil with humus. And there are many statements on that, but if you look at on-farm results, the yields are not decreased after transition to conservation or regenerative agriculture. But also an important fact on farm again is that this is almost neutral economically for farmers. That means that there is no relationship between the gross margin at field scale and the sequestration or carbon loss. So they need incentives and support because there is a risk during transition. So the important thing is to trigger this transition by securing this risk. So also an important conclusion that I will elaborate a little more is that we do not need new technology indeed. We need to apply the known ones. This is the issue we face. New tech is welcome, but it's neither necessary nor the solution as we too often hear. Next slide, please. And also business needs to participate and to become soil regenerative. Why? Because most climate-related issues require transforming the food system if you want to succeed. And the food system will not have rich carbon neutrality without regenerative agriculture. But also there will be no hazard mitigation without coordination of these actors in the food systems on the agroecological transition. So you need both to support and to be coordinated. This is very important. Agroecological transition in this, I think, must be market-driven. Market and business shape the practices of the farmers much more than the regulations and so on. Also, public policies need to be boosted and steered. I think the market actors are much more dynamic on this question. And business actors, they do need a sound common roadmap to reach the objectives. But also this coordination is mandatory if you want to reach this objective with a cost-effective and fast transition. And I think we can't afford failing and we know how to succeed. So are we ready is really the question. Next slide, please. This refers to specific methods which are already well developed, well described, such as result-oriented management schemes and their consequences on the referentials and indicators you must use with farmers, together with farmers to reach the objectives. So this is very clearly elaborated, but very few people know that, and it has to be really referred to and observed. And so I just suggest that each of you who want to apply these methods goes to the basic of that. And this is included, of course, in the Earthworm co-created referential. So the indicators are available now, the methods are available. This is really a matter of applying in close connection with some knowledge. Next slide, please. And of course, there are traps on the way, and I must insist on that. First category of trap is the capacity building, the awareness, which is not enough. I mean, there is a poor awareness on soils and agriculture among us, which leads to a high hazard to take inappropriate, very simple commitments and apply wrong methods in the end. Also, this is maybe emphasized because there are confusing messages coming from research, because there is research in the lab, research in the field, research on farm, and there are contradictory results. So it clearly suggests that to look closely on on-farm results. The second hazard, I think, is very important, is what I call magic thinking. There are, on one hand, gurus proposing very simple solutions, and we share our beliefs in new tech, data science, and so on. Though these keywords, you will find them everywhere. Each time you refer to these questions, there is this magic thinking that some new technology or some data science will solve it all. So I just refer to the Peter Pan complex. I think this is really our complex. Our society gets a difficulty to consider the systemic approach and the reality of the system. And we need a roadmap. This is the third issue. If we don't have a roadmap, we can see that there are multiple non-hierarchized expectations and commitments: greenhouse gases, biodiversity, soil health, carbon sequestration, pesticide regulation. Wanting it all right now just leads to total blockage of all the system. Next slide, please. So this is very important to prioritize to avoid blocking the system. So we have to go towards a sound roadmap for agroecological transition. And there is a condition. We have applied I already said, applied the relevant management schemes and incentive to support the transition and the innovation potential of farmers, because all these techniques of agroecology were invented by farmers. And the first thing to do is to regenerate the soils, and this takes time. So we have to activate the levers of conservation agriculture. And by doing this, all soil function will be dramatically restored, including biodiversity. And this goes hand to hand with greenhouse gases emission reduction and pesticide reduction. So there will be already results on that. And then in a second time, you can further promote pesticide reduction and further decrease greenhouse gases emissions for a full transformation of the food system. So if you look at this time scale, you need, of course, to monitor what occurs along this, because you need to gain knowledge. But it takes almost 5 years at least to go to a transition for a farm to transitions to regenerative agriculture. And then during 5 to 10 years, you are just consolidating this, and you have results on the quality of the soil and the soil function and the biodiversity and the greenhouse gases emission. But then you can introduce the next steps, emphasize more greenhouse gases reduction and also pesticide reduction that can go first with fungicide and insecticide, then on herbicide. There is a hierarchy of these factors. If you want to do everything at the same time, it is blocked. Thank you. Next slide.
And with that, I want to thank you, Pascal, for giving us a good message, or a good news message. Like, it's absolutely possible. We know in many cases how to do this, and it's up to us to scale it, or to repeat it mostly, and across many hectares or acres, or in whatever shape or form you're measuring, because this is going to have a significant impact on climate, on pesticides, on water, only if we do it across large landscapes. And to have a nice bridge to large, I think we have a very interesting perspective here from a large food company. We have Beatrice here from Nestlé France, who's going to talk about sustainable sourcing and their role in the regenerative transition. So please take it away.
Thanks, Cohen. So good afternoon, everybody. So I'm very pleased to be able to share today with you our experience in France on regenerative agriculture. So I am Béatrice Marie-Le Gall. I'm agronomist as well, and I'm head of sustainable sourcing in France for Nestlé. I'm in charge of the initiative linked to carbon footprint reduction on raw material. So knowing that Nestlé, 2/3 of the emissions are linked to agriculture, it's quite a challenging mission. The next slide, please. So Nestlé published its climate roadmap end of 2020 with ambitious targets to reduce its carbon footprint. So first step is 2025. We will reduce our emission by 20% in order to reach net zero by 2050. To allow this transition, financial investments are mobilized up to 1.5 billion Swiss francs. But it's not just about reducing our emission. It's also to encourage regenerative agriculture practices. And what does it mean for Nestlé? Regenerative agriculture is an approach to farming to aim to conserve and restore farmland and its ecosystem, as mentioned by Anne-Sophie and Pascal. It's deliver benefit to the farmers, environment, and society. So our objective with Nestlé is to source 20% of our key ingredients for regenerative agriculture by 2025 and 50% in 2030, which is quite an ambitious target. And this will help the resilience of the farmland to climate change and can therefore help improve as well farmers' livelihood. Next slide, please. So as mentioned previously, yes, for us, soil is a core component of our approach to regenerative agriculture. That's clear. The improvement on soil organic matter helps drive soil fertility. It's also delivered numerous of other benefits like better availability of key nutrients, helping soil retain water, but as well reducing erosion, which is very important, and sequestration of carbon in the ground. So the great thing is that as well, as mentioned, healthy soil provide benefit for the whole territory, and that's very important for us as well. If you go to next slide. So with Earthworm Foundation, we are partner in the Living Soil program. So this program is built on a robust technical framework that has been put together with Earthworm and the scientific committees that was mentioned, and experiment as well with our co-ops and farmers. It's based on practice implementation, but as well on result obtained with clear indicators. And that's very important for us as Nestlé to be fact-based, and that's key, really. So we have established different level in the transition to regenerative agriculture, as you can see on the left side of the slide. So level 1 is really the entry level. Level 2 practice in place and first result, and then level 3, which is more an advanced level with practice deployed and result achieved. And besides this, the technical support that Nestlé is financing through soil analysis, measurement sharing, and training to the co-ops and to the farmers, we create a remuneration scheme to encourage the farmer in the transition, because this is key, as mentioned previously as well. We put incentive in place linked to the different levels. Premium are paid to the farmers to support the transition phase, because risks are taken. There's on cost at the very beginning, potentially as well with the cover crops. And so the idea is really to help this transition, and really to be as a partner with the farmers to help them moving to this in this journey. And the idea is also that at the end, the RegAg practitioners are economically as well competitive. If you go to next slide, please. So we started the journey on living soils with Earthworm Foundation in 2018 in the north of France and east of France. We all know that, as mentioned previously by Pascal, that soil science is quite complex, and there's many aspects to be considered. But the local context is also very important, and we've been experimenting this. So we need also to be pragmatic. So after experiencing the model, we scale up in 2021 with 5 suppliers involved and nearly 200 farmers engaged. And in 2022, our ambition is to engage more than 300 farmers for around 90,000 tons of raw material, which is quite important for us in France. And we are communicating on the results. That's also very important to know what we have been doing so far and what we expect to do in the future. And we have had a first step of communication. It was beginning of March in France during the Salon de l'Agriculture. We had the signature of a 5-year partnership with one of the co-ops engaged with us in this program of Sol Vivant. So we had great feedbacks also from the event, which is good. So lots of interest on Living Soil program, lots of interest on the partnership we are creating. And so we are all really proud of the program and of this very first steps. So thanks very much for your attention.
Thank you so much for that and for giving us this translation of a large commitment of a large global company into very practical steps. And 90,000 tons sound like a lot indeed. And it sounds only like the beginning. And now we switch gears a bit to Mariana, who's from Grupo Bimbo, who is, as you can see on the slide, a global champion of regenerative agriculture. So please take it away, Mariana. And again, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A so we can get to them after the presentation of Mariana.
Thank you, Cohen, and thank you, everyone. So I'm happy to have you here today, guys, and also share with you our journey in regenerative agriculture. As mentioned, I'm the global champion of regenerative agriculture at Grupo Bimbo, and I'm also in charge of the deploying the sustainability strategy for our supply chain globally. So we are happy to present to you what we have done so far. If we move to the next slide, you will see also a brief introduction about our company. Grupo Bimbo is the leading baking company in the world, where our mission is very straightforward, connected with our core business. We want to ensure that our delicious and nutritious baked goods and snacks are in the hands of everybody. Of course, our philosophy is part of our journey. We want to ensure that our company is not only a highly productive and deeply human company, but also a sustainable company. So this is something that remains in our activities, in everything that we do in our business. And also our beliefs are part of this journey. The connection with our people, with our communities is part of the journey. And in that regard, I would like to move forward with the next slide, where you can see some numbers regarding our company in terms of our presence all over the world, the number of associates that help us to make this philosophy and purpose of company alive. So you can imagine that with these numbers, we have a huge portfolio that lead us to the next slide. That is only a few of our brands in our portfolio across the regions that we have presence today. These are, as I mentioned, only a few. If you can want to have more information about these brands, you can go, of course, to our website where you can see all the portfolio. But as you may imagine, with this number of brands and this presence around the world, where we have a responsibility to also move forward and elevate the level of appetite in sustainability. If we move to the next slide, you will see that this is our new strategy that we named Nourishing a Better World. This is a strategy that we created last year with the support of a lot of stakeholders, where we are outlining the ambition of our company to become champions in net zero and also in regenerative agriculture. This is a picture of a sandwich that connects with our business, as you may imagine, wheat and of course bread is one of they are both very critical for us as a company. That's why we selected this picture to represent our strategy. And inside you can see the three main pillars of our strategy, which we name Bake for You, Bake for Life, and Bake for Nature. In Bake for Nature, we have a specific component for regenerative agriculture. And this is because we understand that this philosophy can help us to mitigate all the challenges that we are facing with the continuity of our business because of the crops and the harvest that we need to ensure, but also there is a component, a social component, and also a component for climate change linked to RA. The first step, it was to understand what does regenerative agriculture mean to Grupo Bimbo. And of course, this was not an easy one because there is not a standardized concept of RA. So what we did, it was to, first of all, create benchmarks to understand this concept and also conduct several workshops internally to understand this concept, this philosophy for us as a company. So after reviewing and create these workshops, we have this outcome, which is a working definition of regenerative agriculture, because we know that we are going to be adjusting this concept when we have more progress and have outcomes from our pilots. So in a very high view, this is a philosophy that helps us to promote systems that improve soil health, biodiversity, and ecosystem health. And we recognize the relevance and the richness of the regions. We know that it's not going to be the same to implement pilots in Mexico than North America or South America. So we recognize that in this concept. Also, we want to ensure that the practices that we are going to be implementing are connecting with minimizing soil disturbance, improving the water cycle, and lowering our carbon footprint. And very important that we can include the producer community in this journey. We know that the smallholders and these producers are the key to continue the journey in RA. If we move forward in the next slide, guys, you will see that we have a roadmap where we are outlining the way that we are going to be advancing in regenerative agriculture at Grupo Bimbo. Very important to mention that there is a background in conservation agriculture, and the agribusiness team has been working in these pilots in Mexico for several years now. And with these learnings, we are scaling up this amazing pilot to North America. Very important to mention that in 2021, we dedicated our efforts to understand RA, to understand the resources, the limitations, all the context to try to define the proper path that can guide us to deploy to the next region. With that information and with the support of Erdogan Foundation, we created a business case that helped us to outline all this information and provide more details on how we're going to be deploying RA in our next region. As mentioned, with this business case, we identified that the United States is the next region where we want to have these pilots. So we conducted several interviews with our strategic suppliers from this region. We understood what are they doing, the limitations that they see regarding implementing with the smallholders. We know that the farmers in these regions are facing different challenges than in Mexico, and we need to adapt our pilots in North America accordingly to these needs that we are foreseeing in North America. So with this information and all these data, we are just about to deploy the second pilot for Grupo Bimbo in our journey in sustainability in the United States, in Kansas, and of course more to come. Now that we have all this information, it's going to be beneficial for the rest of the business units so that they, by 2025, have all the elements to start their own journey accordingly to the needs of the regions. And by 2030, we can ensure that around 200,000 hectares of wheat are coming from RA practices. The ultimate goal it is to ensure that by 2050, we are going to be achieving 100% of strategic raw materials coming from RA practices. So this is also connected to the net zero commitment that we have. So we are going to be contributing to the net zero goal that we have as company, and that is also by 2050. So it's very, very connected with that work stream as well. If we move forward to the next slide, you will see the main reasons we are dedicating time and efforts to RA. And as I mentioned, and I have heard along the webinar that we have today, it is not only because it's the right thing to do, it is something that we need to create, to start working on, because we need to have a more profound transformation in our food system. We need to dedicate time and effort to connect with our farmers and ensure that they are introducing this philosophy to also guarantee the continuity of their business and our business. And also we have the opportunity to inspire other organizations to promote RA practices. So more to come on our end. We will be very glad to share with you more about our practices in North America and Mexico. But so far, this is the progress that we have with the support of Erdogan Foundation. Thank you, Corinne.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all the speakers. And we're going to open it up for Q&A now. So I already saw quite a few questions coming into the Q&A. So please keep them coming. We'll try to get to as many as possible. And I saw that Pascal was already answering them in the chat or in the Q&A session as well, which is great because it means we don't have to cover them here. But let's pick a number of them and see also who they are focused on. Let's start with, to any speaker, that's always a bit tricky, but in the pilot phase, I think Barakala is asking, Robin is asking this question in the living soils one, so we can definitely focus on Beatrice, for example, or Anne, Sophie. what are the findings on the financial aspects, or are we too early with that, or what are the costs avoided, which could obviously be input costs in this time of crisis that could be very interesting, or the financial benefits as well from premiums, etc. What have you seen so far on the financial aspects of this transition? And I think I would like to ask, Anne-Sophie, maybe to answer that, if we have some details on that already, or which are too early for that on the living soil example.
It's like looking for the grail. That's the question everybody's asking. Both companies to understand how to tailor a little bit the premiums, for example, and the farmers too, because those that are still doubting, they want to be sure that in the end they are going to be okay, right? Now it's very hard to do that kind of research and give certain figures. Now we know, for example, that there are wrong assumptions. Like I don't know how it is elsewhere, but in France there's been a belief that somehow the money that could be gained from selling carbon credits would make it all with the transition. And now we see that with a price around $30 a ton, it's not going to help. It's not
with the price of 30,000, probably it would have helped. Yeah, but $30 is not going to make it. Yeah.
So right now, well, maybe Beatrice, you can complement, but companies are a bit in a okay, let's try and see. So it's something between the consent to pay from a company and the consent to receive and move from a farmer. That's a bit where we are. So now the more we work and the more we're getting a clear idea. But yeah, for now it's still a bit trial and
and clearly I think we are partnering with our supplier on the topic, and we are building the relationship, but not only as well, this remuneration scheme was built together with them. So I'm not sure that it's the best model, but at least it's something that seems to be as the very beginning where we are today, at least that seems to be all right from what the farmer are expecting, and all right on our side as well. So I think it's more in the discussion, constructing together, because obviously we don't have all the facts, all the costs of all the everything to be able to have, yes, this is a cost. No, we are building together with our suppliers and COPs on the topic, clearly.
And thank you so much for that. And let's stay with you, actually, as we have two questions on the support for farmers. One from Mark on the technical support, or what kind of tech is needed, and one from Maria. What have you seen of working with this group of farmers and now quickly scaling to 330? Like, what kind of support do they need on the education? What kind of training have you seen over the last years that the farmers in the Living Soil project are needed? Obviously, it's always context specific, but there in Northern France, what is most in need when it comes to technical assistance and technical support?
In fact, Anne-Sophie can complement, from what we've seen. In fact, they need to have examples. They need to have peers that are doing things all right, and they need to have examples. I think that's to see on the field what it means. So be quite concrete, pragmatic, and not very there's one way and that's it. No, and this is how we are making the change, with supporting them on training side, but not only on technical part, also in mindset. I would say it's also a mix of all this that would make things happen at the end.
I believe the core thing is it's about reconceiving or redesigning the cropping system. So getting out of the approach that is, okay, I put a crop, what do I need to do on that crop? And if I have a problem, what's the solution? Now the farmer has to consider the whole system, and all elements are intertwined or interrelated. And once you move one element, others are going to move in another direction, or sometimes unexpected. So you see the challenge. At the same time, we need very close support and coaching, and peer experience, etc. And at the same time, we are talking about having a mass effect and doing things at scale, because, well, 50% of the soil that's gone, we have a problem, so we need to act now. But so we believe that in the long run, there will be a snowball effect, but in the very beginning, to convince farmers, it's true that working in small peer groups, having farmers seeing what the others are doing and getting that very close support is required.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I remember from the interview with Bastien actually that doing non-scalable things at the beginning to get scale down the road. And it's very much seeing to believe, which means you need something nearby, because otherwise you can always use the argument, yeah, that won't work here because I have a different farm, a different soil, different climate, etc., etc.
Yeah.
So it's very much seeing, I hear from the technical support, and then once I want to move to get the right support to get moving. But the believing or the seeing the potential is crucial to see it in action, and not on a video somewhere. Yeah, thank you very much for that answer. We're going to switch to a very different question from Kimberly actually, and I would like to ask Mariana of the Grupo Bimbo, do you see this, the whole regenerative movement, regenerative agriculture movement, also as a draw for people to work on? Like, people are looking for jobs with more meaning. Have you been, I wouldn't say using it, I'm saying using between brackets, but have you seen that effect as well, that these projects are getting a lot of interest from internal Grupo Bimbo, but also maybe from outside, the people wanting to work in, let's say, something positive in the food sector, being part of the solution, not part of the problem? Have you seen that effect yet, or are we too early there?
Yes, thank you, Cohen, and thank you, Kimberly, for the question. Actually, we have seen in the new generations and even in the current and associates at Grupo Bimbo, genuine interest for sustainability. This is something that is growing, and this is very useful because we are internal allies helping us to be ambassadors by deploying the different initiatives that we have at Grupo Bimbo. Also, externally, we have seen people reaching out to be part of the story, be part of the journey. So yes, we have seen an incremental interest from the population in general to be part of the story. And also I think that it has been helpful that internally we have a communication team that is helping us to socialize what we have done at Grupo Bimbo. So I think that this creates awareness internally of what we have done, what is coming, and that everyone at our company is able to make a difference from the roles at Grupo Bimbo. So I think that with this awareness, we are going to be able to advance faster as company. And also in procurement, we have deployed some videos where we are sharing our status in RA and other practices, where we are also encouraging our associates to start including sustainability in the sourcing process, of course, because this is procurement. And also we can have roles of leadership in the categories that can help us to advance faster. So the answer is yes. And we are also promoting and creating awareness internally by sharing and socializing our journey at Grupo Bimbo.
Perfect, thank you so much for that. And we can actually switch to Beatrice and ask if that's similar at Nestlé. Do you see a draw to this? And then we have another question actually from Alex. For Nestlé, are you looking beyond carbon when sourcing sustainable ingredients? What metrics and data are you using to assess the environmental impact beyond the carbon piece? So we have two questions. Let's start with the first one. Do you see similar drawing because of the whole regenerative movement? And then second, let's get into beyond carbon conversation.
Yeah, in fact, obviously, all the sustainable topics are key and give a sense for the young people. I think that's absolutely right, and we can see this in all our communication internally. We have a very good feedback from the young people coming, and to be clear, for example, my role, my role is very new. I just get this role in last September, and in fact I had lots of people coming to me and within Nestlé saying, okay, yes, it would be great, what's the kind of job you will have in your team. So I think there's a clear interest, a clear and it's very important for our people, Nestlé people, that Nestlé is investing there. I think that's clear. And obviously we have been doing internal training in order for our employee to understand what we are doing, to understand what is the meaning of regenerative agriculture, living soil, and as well, not only and also in the factories, but because it's also, we can be proud of the ingredients that we are sourcing from local farms where we are implementing this kind of practices, because the farmers are proud and our employees as well, and I think that's really very important. So this was for the first one. The second one, so obviously beyond carbon, it's not only carbon. Carbon is one thing because it's due to the impact on climate. Biodiversity is also another thing that we will improve with regenerative agriculture practices. So I think that's also something very important. It's coming more and more on the front of the scene, but as well water. I think there's a number of indicators that we are also following besides just carbon, indeed.
Yeah, it really feels like an emerging space beyond carbon. There's a lot of hype around it, but I see that it's starting to settle down a bit, that we might, just for paying carbon, we're not going to get there. And so we need to look beyond there. And I think water is very interesting, obviously biodiversity, nutrient density. Let's not get into the whole discussion of food as medicine, but it is an interesting space. So thank you so much for that answer. And I see that Pascal is being extremely active in the chat as well to answer questions, which is great. But I would love to ask a live one as well, because we haven't heard him in a bit. So, but maybe you already answered the question to Hector, but very practical question. How often do you recommend to run a soil health analysis on organic matter? Is that yearly? Is that seasonally? What's your without giving farming advice, obviously, but what's your intake there, Pascal?
Okay, thank you. I was answering in the yes, but it's good to share this. Of course, organic carbon, it doesn't change so fast. So a good advice, depending on the levels you're activating, but a good advice would be to watch it every 5 years, for instance. This is the load line of soil quality, because this is the load line of soil vulnerability, soil resilience, and so on. And it is also then the load lines of many other properties. But you can be very harmful to the soil structure with a very heavy truck or whatever in a second. And you can restore an acceptable soil structure in a season. So you have these cycles of quality. You can also have this with the pH and so on. So you have some parameters you have to watch on a very short time scale to make decision. If you always damage the structure and never restore it, you will never store more carbon. So you have to watch this kind of parameters, mostly soil structure, pH, of course, also the mineral content for your plant, fertility plants. Watch them on different time scales. The structure requires a lot of attention, in particular when you damage the structure. But for organic carbon, every 5 years or every 10 years, depending on the way you apply the restoration factors.
Okay, so it really depends what you want to get out, obviously, of the,
but the idea
the analysis. But the carbon part is relatively,
it's the load line. So you will have less fluctuation and a higher quality the more you have carbon. But this is slow, of course, 5-10 years. And then you have to consider the other factors in between, because this may jeopardize your efforts if you don't take care of them.
Yeah, and actually to stay there, because it's a perfect bridge. You were warning us for simple solutions and go like simple solutions that fix everything. What is the risk of somebody taking one of, like, can you have an example of a simple solution? What's the risk? Like, let's say a farmer or a business applies one of that. Like, how risky is that to fall in the trap of this thing is going to change everything?
Yes, sure, I can. I also provided some examples in the chat. This magic thinking it's supported by the idea that we can change one factor and it's okay. So it was one of the first factor we applied was soil tillage. Then we thought to chemicals. Then we thought to pesticides and so on. And now it comes with absolutely the same way of thinking with bio fertilizers or whatever, biostimulants and whatever. So this is a systemic problem you have to deal with. So you have to consider the system, and you have to consider the ecology of a system that you have to reach the highest level it can reach each soil system. And this is a very systemic issue. So for instance, when you see, I just provided an example, I was really astonished because FAO is doing a very good job, but then they got a web page saying, okay, how a breakthrough in soil analysis could change our food system for the better. And they're just promoting an analysis which exists since more than 40 years. And it just provides you less expensive soil analysis. So, and in the 3 following pages, the word farmer is not here. But the farmer is a decision maker. I mean, locally, you have to work with them. So it's not because you have a new analysis that you will solve the food system. That's absolutely wrong, but we are all fascinated. So in all the perspectives that are developed by most engineers or whatever, the question is, okay, what is the new tech that will save us? This is what I call the Peter Pan complex. Please face reality. And we know how to do. So if we need a new technology, this new technology is being capable of upscaling what we already know with all actors together, because this requires working all together. This is a technology, and this is the one which is proposed by Ashram Foundation.
And it's a context specific one, I think, and it's a good question in the Q&A as well. Like, are these, and I would even make it sharper, because there's net zero farms. I don't think there's a zero in farming. Are there net positive farms already out there, and how do we identify them for you, Pascal? Sorry.
Okay, I'm not an expert of making this kind of evaluation. It's still disputed, you know, the way you can make it. So what is interesting is that you can decrease all the factors that are emitting greenhouse gases, and you can increase the sequestration. And we know which kind of levers we can use for that. And if you consider them in a systemic approach, the only way to do this is to restore the soil quality. All others go straight forward to magic thinking. So do you include the production in terms of sequestration of CO2 by plants and so on in the calculation and so on? So you have many ways to calculate it. So what is a net zero farm? I mean, it can be really disputed, but what is sure is that you need to produce something to eat, and we can dramatically decrease its climate impact. And it can help sequester a lot of carbon, much more than the 4 per mil initiative in all regions, I mean, in temperate regions.
Yeah, we've seen many examples of very, let's say, farms that show to sequester a lot. And if it's exactly net zero or even net positive, it obviously depends. Are you going to include scope 3 emissions as well there, all the way down to the kitchen of the person or to the restaurant? I mean, there's a long, and then what do you do with the nutrients afterwards? That's a whole different discussion.
Okay, if you apply biochar, for example, there is one of the magic thinking is biochar. You know, you get this word. Okay, the word is the Sylvester Stallone of the soil. You know, you get the biochar, but you have to make the whole balance. Would this biomass wouldn't this biomass provide more carbon sequestered if you directly apply it to the field for your cover crops?
Yeah,
these questions were never posed. So that's, I mean, of course you know the answer. You don't pose the question and you know the answer.
I'm gonna ask you to wrap up, as we are on top of the hour. We open a whole different rabbit hole with biochar. We can talk another hour for that, but that will be another webinar. I want to thank all the speakers so much for taking the time today to share their journey. It is a journey. There's no, we are regenerative or we're not. This is a continuum, and it will never be done. In a couple of years, we'll look back and see like how much deeper and how much faster and how much more complex we went. So thank you so much for sharing today. Thank you for being open. Thank you for answering the questions in the Q&A. Thank you for attending, and hope to see you at the next webinar.
Thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.